In the autumn of 1347, 12 Genoese trading ships docked at the Sicilian port of Messina. Within weeks, the people unloading those ships began to die. It was the start of a catastrophe that would ultimately kill half the continent. The textbook narrative of this tragedy is built on three things: filthy medieval streets, ubiquitous black rats, and infected fleas. This rat-centric history is the defining story of the pre-modern era, a universally accepted explanation for the death of 50 million people. But ancient DNA extracted from the bones of the victims is now challenging this entire timeline. Modern forensics and zoo archaeology have uncovered a different reality at the original crime scenes. The defining cautionary tale of the 14th century is based on a false premise: the rat was framed. To find the primary suspect, researchers sieved through over 2,000 animal bones at major medieval ports. They used a 2mm mesh to ensure that even the smallest rodent remains would be caught. At major plague ground zeros, the results were consistent. Archaeologists found absolutely zero rat bones. This model relies on an epizootic delay. Local rats must first die in massive numbers, taking 3 to 4 weeks, for fleas to jump to humans. But the Black Death crossed frozen territories at speeds mathematically impossible for rats, outpacing the necessary biological delay. With the primary physical suspect missing and the biology failing to match the speed of spread, science had to look for the true killer. The story doesn't begin in Europe, but rather with a cluster of massive volcanic eruptions in the year 1345. These eruptions released a global veil of ash and sulfate gases that dimmed the sun, triggering a sudden little ice age that disrupted growing seasons across the globe. Tree ring data from this period shows blue rings, malformed plant cells that froze during their own summer growing season because the temperatures dropped so sharply. Consecutive crop failures and mass starvation forced Italian maritime republics to push their grain ships deep into Mongol territories around the Sea of Azov in search of emergency supplies. These ships, sent on a desperate mission to find food, inadvertently connected Western Europe with the Yersinia pestis bacteria. The pandemic was a consequence of early globalization colliding with a sudden climate emergency. Inside the crowded, unwashed homes of the 1340s, floors were typically made of compacted clay and covered with rushes that were left undisturbed for decades, creating a damp, biological lasagna of organic waste. This environment supported the true vector of the Black Death, the human flea and the human body louse, living directly in the seams of people's woolen clothing. These parasites allowed the plague to bypass rats entirely, jumping instantly from person to person in shared beds and packed churches. While the bacteria spread, medieval communities fought back with the only tools they understood. They treated field mice as morally accountable creatures, writing formal legal notices and pinning them to rocks to threaten the rodents with eviction. The wealthy class sought more expensive cures, drinking crushed emeralds or rubbing pieces of chopped snakes on their plague buboes. One measure actually worked: the invention of the 40-day isolation period, or quarantino. While doctors relied on absurd theology and useless pastes, survival came from isolating households and breaking the parasite chain. If human medicine was entirely useless at the time, how did the outbreak actually end? It wasn't the Great Fire of London or the arrival of the brown rat that stopped the spread. DNA analysis of the victims shows that the war ended in a microscopic truce. The Yersinia pestis bacterium mutated, eventually becoming a weaker version of itself that could stay inside a host without killing them quite so quickly. The deadliest pandemic in history was halted by evolutionary exhaustion on a cellular level. In households where every member fell sick, those who lived passed a specific biological legacy to their descendants. Because the plague acted as a massive genetic filter, the survivors effectively rewrote the human immune system for the generations that followed. Our modern warming climate is now creating the exact type of extreme environmental disruptions and habitat shifts that triggered the 1345 outbreak. Understanding the true mechanics of the Black Death shows that our highly connected world remains vulnerable to these same climate-driven evolutionary shocks today.